The Supreme Court heard arguments today on whether ticketing homeless people is cruel and unusual and violates the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. City and state officials across the country are closely watching the case, which will decide whether the homeless have the right to camp in public places. People who live in these encampments are also following the case as they are concerned about efforts to criminalize the population rather than build shelters and affordable housing. The case is the city of Grants Pass versus Johnson, which was brought by several involuntarily homeless people in Grants Pass, Oregon, who challenged the city's ban on public camping. Justice Sonia Sotomayor grills Grants Pass, Oregon's attorney, Theane Evangelis, on why city officials want to enforce criminal penalties for the unhoused.
Say only homeless people who sleep outdoors will be arrested. That's the testimony of your chief of police, two or three officers, which is, if you read the crime, it's only stopping you from sleeping in public if you, for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. And the police officers testified that that means that if a stargazer wants to take a blanket or a sleeping bag out at night to watch the stars and falls asleep, you don't arrest them. You don't arrest babies who have blankets over them. You don't arrest people who are sleeping on the beach, as I tend to do if I've been there a while. You only arrest people who don't have a second home. Is that correct?
Well,
who don't have a home.
So, no, these laws are generally applicable. They apply to everyone.
That's what you want to say. Give me one example, because your police officers couldn't. And they explicitly said, if someone has another home, has a home, and is out there and happens to fall asleep, they won't be arrested. Fall asleep with something on them.
Well, Joint Appendix, page 98, is one example of a citation issued to a person with a home address. But more importantly, I think what we're getting at here is that these laws regulate conduct of everyone. There's nothing in the law that criminalizes homelessness. I really
That's what you say, but if I look at the record and see differently.
Theane Evangelis is the Senior Director of Courts and Legal Policy for the Center for American Progress, joins us from Washington, D.C. Theane, glad to have you here. So, I mean, that was a great line of questioning right there from Justice Sotomayor, because laws need to be specific. And what she was getting at is, if somebody just accidentally falls asleep, what, are you going to ticket them?
People falling asleep while on a picnic at a park, can we ticket them? Not sure how far this could extend. And she makes some really great points that this law of general applicability, so-called, doesn't actually do what it says. It is specifically aimed at unhoused people, not just average people on the street.
What was being said by the other justices, especially the conservative justices?
It was interesting to listen, because the thing that struck me was a lot of the lack of compassion that was elicited from the Chief Justice, because he was seeming to implicate that just being in a shelter for one night erases the status of being homeless. And the litigator for the individual plaintiffs were saying being unhoused is not having a permanent address, and being put into a shelter or obtaining shelter for 1 or 2 nights, even a week, does not obviate the problem of being unhoused and homeless, because it doesn't change their status. As soon as they lose access to that shelter, they become unhoused, homeless again, and they're subject to these laws. And they're escalating fines. The first fine is $275. The next fine is $600. A recidivist found outside, sleeping outside multiple times, will be criminally trespassed and can be jailed for up to 30 days. And this is essentially a reestablishment of debtors' prisons that were gotten rid of hundreds of years ago at this point.
So, I mean, obviously, you have a lot of cities that have been dealing with this You hear folks in San Francisco, you hear folks in Los Angeles talk about these different things. And as always, whenever we're having these discussions about why something is happening, very rarely do we want to deal with the root cause of this. We really want to focus just on that in and of itself. So when you talk about homelessness, you have to deal with, well, how many of those folks are actually dealing with mental illness, which then gets at the lack of funding for mental illness, which gets at the cutting of funds of the last 20, 25 years for community social and services centers. Then you also have to deal with the exorbitant costs that we're also seeing when it comes to housing and how things have shot up. Very rarely of those part of the conversation.
Adding in drug addiction, and then just pure unfortunate economic situations that some people find themselves in due to layoffs, a lack of work, what have you. And you see increases in policing costs. You see increases in jailing costs. Let's not even, or without even talking about the lack of affordable housing in so many markets these days where people can't afford to live in a one-bedroom apartment without having roommates. It's becoming untenable for a lot of people to function, and yet we're seeing an increase in funding for policing, an increase in funding for jailing, whereas if we were investing in these root causes of drug addiction, of mental health, of general wellness, then it would cost these municipalities and localities a whole heck of a lot less. It would be less of a drain on society, and I think there's probably a likelihood that you would see much more beneficial outcomes of people rejoining society and being productive members of society when these unfortunate or unchecked mental health issues have resulted in them being unhoused for so long.
So based upon listening to these arguments, obviously it's one thing to sort of prejudge or to guess, but based upon listening to the various questions, what did you glean from this in terms of what potentially could be a decision? So
I think the more liberal justices are looking to find a solution. I think a lot of the questions really dug deep into what do the courts need to be doing with regard to staying away from being policymakers, because this is such a complex and complicated issue. Can the Supreme Court hand down edicts that say this is what you need to be doing? And I think the court very much wants to shy away from that. I believe it was Justice Jackson who was discussing the possibility that this case be mooted because Oregon has passed a statute prohibiting laws like these passed in grants past from going into effect and being able to effectively criminalize being unhoused. There's also the question that Justice Thomas brought up as to whether the case itself was moot because all of the individual plaintiffs have not been found criminally liable under these local ordinances. So whether it's just civil cases at this point, so whether it's appropriate to bring it under an Eighth Amendment claim like this for cruel and unusual punishment like this case is yet to be seen. The other thing is that there are a lot of municipalities that are existing under a prior Ninth Circuit case that has made outlawing being homeless or unhoused illegal. So, there's already some kind of controlling law in effect in the states covered by the Ninth Circuit that other areas are following.
All right, then. We certainly will be seeing what they decide. Theane, thanks a lot.
Fanbase is pioneering a new era of social media for the creator economy. This next generation social media app with over 600,000 users is raising $17 million, and now is your chance to invest. For details on how to invest, visit startengine.com/fanbase or scan the QR code. Another way we're giving you the freedom to be you without limits.